everyone. This is Paul Casey, Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series. We're going to welcome a very special person to our show today. He is the 2022 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame nominee, and we're excited him as being part of the Hall of Fame. I mean, the who's who of what's what, and you can't get any better than this man. He has taken the level of not only the martial arts, but what he does for a living, and has risen it to levels of just pure movie iconic magic. And so today we're going to welcome Mr. Rick Avery. How you doing, Rick?
I'm good.
Good. Great smile. Good smile. That's always everybody says. Rick, you've been in the martial arts a long time. Okay. Before that, you were law enforcement, correct? Or were you in law enforcement first and then martial arts?
No, actually, I was in the martial arts since 1972, something around there. And then I got into law enforcement a few years later.
Well, let's address the issues of the questions that everybody's going to ask you. Tell us a little bit about why you went into the martial arts and the system, style, or discipline that you chose.
I'm going to make all these long stories short. Yeah, when I was in the Army, one of my sergeants was doing some martial arts movements in front of me. And this is back in 1968, when they were not well known in the United States. People take it for granted with MMA and martial arts today that it's always been around here. It wasn't. It was rare back then. And for me to see these movements, I was intrigued. So he taught me a basic punch, a basic block, a basic snap kick. Back then, kicking with your feet was considered dirty fighting. So I went back to the US after I was discharged. I looked for a school. I couldn't find one. I lived in Santa Barbara, but eventually I was able to find one, and I started studying Kenpo. I walked into that school and saw people performing forms, and I was blown away by it. It was gorgeous but deadly. And back then, anyone who had a black belt, it was truly like having a weapon. Because no one else knew how to do these types of moves. I eventually hooked up with Mr. Parker, was promoted by him, and studied with him. Wonderful man. And then my career just took off. I started doing movies. I competed. I fought from here off to the Midwest and just had a good time with it. I had a school for 12 years. It was very successful, and sold it so that I could pursue my movie career down here in Hollywood.
Your lessons with Ed Parker. Many people never had the opportunity to meet the founding Grandmaster. Fortunately, I did. I knew him from 78 till he died in 90. Can you explain or share with us your personal relationship with him?
Yes. Warmth. Big man, very warm. And I would say, in my opinion, non-egotistical about it. Everyone else has their own opinions and their own relationships with him, but I was a kid that was coming down from Santa Barbara to see him. And back then, Kenpo was not as rigid as many other styles. And that is to say that a style like Shotokan or Taekwondo, they go back to their traditional values and moves, and they stick with those moves no matter what. Kenpo has always been a style that changes with the times, and depending on the school and the instructor, things will change in the techniques as they're done, or the kicks, or the fighting styles, or the forms, to reflect the instructor who's running that school. And Mr. Parker seemed to embrace that. There was a lot of masters that didn't. I think some of that goes back to some of the older guys that I've talked to. Mr. Parker invented all of these techniques, but many times he would forget them himself because there were so many of them. So as far as my relationship to him was concerned, I thought I'd be an outsider, but I was welcomed, and always, like I said, with a lot of warmth, that Hawaiian, greeting type of warmth.
Did you go to the tribute to him in '88 at the Bonaventure?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, I didn't.
When you
trained, I went to a lot of the internationals.
Oh, the internationals was sort of like a homecoming, like a high school reunion.
Yeah.
It was really a lot of fun. The camaraderie. Friday nights was exciting to get. That's when you really met up with everybody.
Yeah.
Were there other teachers that you got the chance to work with other than Ed Parker?
Yeah, I worked with, it's funny, he's not really a Kenpo man, but I worked a lot with Joe Louis. I got all my fighting skills from Joe. Again, a man that had his own reputation, but I found to be one of the most influential people I've ever met in building my ego and self-confidence. I also worked a little with Dick Willett back then. I worked with Jerry Poteet at the Eskrima School, which I really enjoyed. And then I also worked with a man named, oh boy, see how your mind goes? It'll come to me later in my weapons. But I worked with a lot of guys. Steve Fisher and I worked out a lot back in the day. So yeah, I had a lot of great positive influences.
Did you visit the West LA school for the most
Yeah.
part? Okay.
Yeah.
Then you obviously trained over there. Did you get a chance to work with Danny Inosanto?
Not personally. I went to his school and I studied with Jerry Petit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get any better than these guys with the mixed martial arts and the thinking of. And Parker was that way too. I mean, he obviously has influences with over Bruce and everybody else is quite obvious if you look at the influence of how he inspired them.
Yeah, and this is when the seeds of martial arts were planted in the United States. And back then it was frowned on to make money as an instructor when you ran a school. There were articles in Black Belt magazine and Karate Illustrated about how dare you charge for lessons. This is it's not noble. And then we had the franchises start, and then the Bruce Lee era started, and you saw schools pop up everywhere. Many schools with unqualified instructors because everybody wanted to learn after seeing Enter the Dragon.
What was the greatest lesson Ed Parker gave you?
Wow. I don't know that he gave me a particular lesson that I would gain except for being humbly confident. That would cover it, I believe.
Okay. You have over 100 karate, fighting, and kata tournament wins. Can you talk about the first time you fought in a tournament?
Yeah, I have a picture of it somewhere. My hair is all blown up, and you got one of those old cover photos from a Black Belt magazine with the guy crazed. Yeah, I remember the first and just I won. I still got the little trophy from winning, but there was not much finesse there. I just used every bit of power that I could and charged forward. I had just taken my first Joe Louis seminar, so I was using what he called the lunge punch and the forward hand strike that he had learned from Bruce Lee. So yeah, I remember my first fight.
What about your lessons with Joe Louis? What was the things that really stand out for you that you personalized?
Joe is one of the few people in my life that humbled me when I stood next to him. You could sense such power. I've not had a sense of fear of most men, but I could always feel that from him. He had these giant knuckles on him. And when I had taken my first black belt test, I went down to Dick Willett School. He had invited me to do what they call a staff promotion. Because on my first test, there weren't any black belts available for me to fight at the end. And I had already done all my katas and techniques. And who was I supposed to fight? I was supposed to do 3 rounds with Joe Louis. So Joe said to me, first round, Rick, I'm going to be evasive. So he just ran around and tired me out more. I was already exhausted. Second round, he said, okay, now I'm going to be a blocker. So he was taking on the personality of a different black belt each time. And then, of course, the last round, he said, okay, now I'm going to be an aggressive fighter. So I got a chance to test on my black belt test for the staff promotion with Joe. And he just evokes a sense of developing confidence in yourself. He used to say, every opponent you fight, don't look at their stature, their muscles, their face, their scars, their looks. Everybody has a nose, a solar plexus, and a groin, and they all respond the same to them. And I remember my very good friend, Benny Urquides. We would go to these tournaments, and, you know, back then in the day, you would know, they'd call for the black belts, okay, lightweight division, and the guys would all line up. And there wouldn't be any preset person you were fighting. It would be who you lined up behind. Well, the first person in line all the time would be Benny, because he didn't care who was behind him. That says a lot about your confidence. So that's what I got from Joe, a lot of confidence. He taught you how to do that.
Did you ever train with Jerry Smith?
No.
Okay,
No,
Jerry
because
was
he was on the other coast, right? He was back east.
Well, no, he was in Southern California. He worked for Black Belt Magazine, and he came up through the ranks with, they were both the Marine, you know, he was the Marine, and he came in from Okinawa.
Yeah.
So he's a wonderful man. He actually had many years of training with Joe Louis, as well as, you know, interaction with Bruce Lee. Did you ever meet Bruce Lee?
Not personally. I went to, and that's who I forgot his name, Tadashi Yamashita. Okay. I went to the, I believe it was the Elks Lodge, and they had this giant teams tournament, and everybody was there. Jerry Piddington, Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, and Bruce Lee was there with Tadashi Yamashita. And Tadashi did the apple trick, blindfolded, right, watermelon trick, and that was the first time I saw him, and so I went and studied weapons with him. But Bruce was there, and then after he passed away, I worked with his son, Brandon, on all of his movies. And then I did a feature fight for Kim Kahana. I was supposed to fight Darnell Garcia, but I ended up fighting John Natividad. And his former, well, his widow, Karen, was there. So,
yeah. How, you know, we were saying I will get back to the movie side, so we'll revisit Brandon in a few minutes and the people you've had the great pleasure to work with. In your training, though, did you always go there to see if you could find something that could be your personal, you could add to your toolbox?
When I went where?
When you went to these lessons with other people and you were training, you try to add to your toolbox, correct? Or
yes. I mean, Yamashita, I went there, studied the bow, the tonfa, and the nunchaku, which was, he's probably the foremost weapons master with those weapons. When I went to Jerry Petit, it was to learn eskrima and how that worked. So yeah, I was building tools. I wanted to run my school in a way that wasn't just this. We didn't have a lot of weapons in Kenpo back then. As a matter of fact, the nunchaku set that's now utilized in Kenpo, I designed.
Did you really? Congratulations. We'll have to talk about that sometime.
Yeah. And that was after I had studied with Yamashita for a few years. I designed that set. So I was trying to add on to the style, and particularly in my school, because I had a fascination with weapons. So yeah, every person I went to, there was a reason. Steve Fisher, the same thing. I wanted to learn timing and fighting. Steve was this heavy set, slow-looking Mexican fighter. I say that with love because I love him to death. And I went down there, I wanted to learn timing because he wasn't so much fast, quick. His timing was impeccable. And so we went down and we trained together. And I remembered doing this hook kick to him when I was able to raise my leg back then. It was a hook kick fake that I would then come back with a snap kick. And he picked that up, put it in his mind. And then we both went to Compton, where BKF, the Black Karate Federation, was having a fight. And somebody just brought it up to me. They were there. I was the only white guy there. Steve was the only Mexican there. And we ended up fighting for the grand championship. And lo and behold, that fake that I'd been doing on him, there was a picture in one of the karate magazines of him countering that because he was just waiting for me to throw it. So he won the grand champion. I got second place. But yeah, I got something from every one of these guys.
Well, I'm gonna drop a few names at you right now, and then I'll ask you when it came to Ed Parker and you were creating the Nunchuck set. Did you ever meet Chuck Sullivan? You know,
I've met
Grandmaster.
Chuck Sullivan since then. I've been to his house, done his little radio pod show. Yeah, I've met Chuck on a number of occasions.
He was very interesting. He told the story. Chuck told us the story of how Ed Parker was working on the staff set, and he came in. It was this very elongated, I mean, long, form. And Chuck said, "Well, can I work with that?" And he cut it down to what we see today. And Parker said, when he showed it to him, Parker says, "Love it. That's what we're going with." Okay. When it came to you, did Mr. Parker ask you to create that?
No, no, he didn't. And it wasn't brought into the realm until after his death.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, so he had no real part of that at all.
I've had interviews with Steve Sanders Muhammad, basically on the scene. Great guy. I love him. He's very gentle soul. Boy, he was telling me, and we discussed it with, he used the reference of Bruce. And he was talking with Bruce. He was saying, Bruce said, "I'm not that fast. I just work on timing. So I know when to hit. And that's why it comes off so fast." But in Steve's case, he says, "But you're fast."
Yes.
I said, "Well, wow." It's like that. Did you ever work out with Mr. Muhammad or Donnie Williams?
No, no. I fought Donnie Williams.
Oh, my.
I fought Donnie Williams. And all I remember is it went into double overtime. And I just remember him kicking me so hard I would go flying out of the ring. And he eventually said in the second overtime to the judge, the referee, he says, "You want me to kill this white guy before you give me a point?"
Oh, wow.
And he won the match fair and square. But man, was that guy, I'd never been kicked that hard in my life. Yeah, Donnie Williams.
He was inducted last year. I like Bishop Williams. He's a wonderful man.
Yeah.
And just gentle.
Well, he's changed over the years. He's mellowed out quite
Well,
a
that's
bit.
good for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not, maybe it's good for you too now, I guess.
Yeah, it's good for me
So
too.
anyway, you get into that. So you're looking at this and the BKF. Wow. So I'm guessing you got a chance to Cliff Stewart and Ron Chappelle.
Yeah.
And you got to work with those guys a little bit.
I just had, we were just down in Chinatown, I want to say maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. He had to get together with all of his black belts, and most of them are cops, and he was a former cop himself. And I actually won the grand championship at his Los Angeles Invitational one year. But yeah, I know Ronnie's wonderful, love him to death.
He actually has so much knowledge, and as a protege of Ark Wong, and people don't. And Ark was inducted last year posthumously. The martial arts museum, Michael Matsuda was there to accept on his behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everybody trained with that man. Everybody, even Ed Parker, he was with him. There's no doubt. Dr. Chappelle, you get down and it's just real rational, logical. And as you, as a law enforcement officer, you understand how you have to build that, understand it, that if it has any weaknesses, it cracks, it's not going to go any further. And I've been asked to go down that twice, but I couldn't because I live in Las Vegas. One of my other favorite guys, and I wonder if you know him as well, is Carl Totten. Do you know Carl Totten?
No, I don't.
He has the Dow Institute right there in North Hollywood off of Lancashire and around the corner. So let's move on to some, this boy. We're just scratching with you. You could spend a lifetime talking to you about what you've done in the martial arts and the people. By the way, you did beat John Conway for the grand championship, correct?
Did.
John and I both tested for black belt in 1981 in Pasadena.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that might have had something to do with my promotion. I had a test where I had Mr. Parker come up to Santa Barbara, and we did the test outside in a park. And a lot of people said, "No, you don't want to do that." It's, he loved it. It was fantastic. And he had brought Conway up to fight. It was at the Flores Brothers tournament in Oxnard. And when I won that championship, he had seen that. And when I had put this test on later on, I think it was probably a year later, he promoted me on the spot. It was a surprise promotion, which was quite humbling.
Well, sir, you might be humbled, but you earn everything. It's quite.
I was happy I had been doing sit-ups when he gave me the kick. Let's put it.
Yeah,
that
he had
way.
a way of doing kicks that he could twist you. He hit it and spin you this way, or hit you and spin you that way. And I remember one time I did several seminars with him in Pasadena. I was in Oxnard at the Flores, but there's a very famous picture of Jim Mitchell, Frank Trejo, the Flores brothers, and Mr. Parker, and they still have that on their website. That's from 1980. When I was a brown belt. I made, this is like 6 months later, I got promoted. But we were up there, and there's a picture of myself with several other people. I'm the only guy wearing a white gi top. I don't know why I'm wearing the white, and everybody else is a black. And Trejo. Did you ever know Frank Trejo?
Yes, I did.
What's your impressions of Mr. Trejo?
Someone who embodies the style, lived it. There's a lot of people that can jaw about being a black belt and being a tough guy. He was the real deal. And there's a lot of people, or I should say a limited number of people, who influence so many. And Frank's name comes up to this day all the time. So that proves the influence that this man had. Even to the end, when he was going through his illness, the strength that he put out? Just an amazing man.
Well, certain warriors are cut from a certain piece of cloth. That was one of them. Yeah. And I could always tell his mindset of what name he used when he addressed me. If it was fun, it was Pablo. And when it wasn't, it was Paul. It's like being with my dad. I loved him. He loved him. He took me under his wing. And the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, Rick, was influenced and created because of Frank Trejo. And I said this to you probably before, but I didn't want him nor anybody else to be footnotes in our Kenpo world. A lot of talented men and women that will never get recognition because they don't seek that. Their peers do. And that's what was the whole purpose of the Hall of Fame and why you were chosen. You've proven yourself to many people. I've known of your name. And I'm very honored to have this moment talking with you. So Frank was the guy. He picked the first 10, and then I picked the second 2, which was 12. He didn't know that. That was him. And posthumously, it was Mr. Parker. And we had all those people there at the Alamo in Alhambra. And that was our first. And I mean, it was a reunion of the who's who in Kenpo. Some hadn't seen each other in 20, 30, 40 years. And they couldn't remember, sir, why they didn't talk to each other anymore. I mean, it's like, why don't we manage that? We don't know. I mean, people flew from all over the country, and you would know most of the people. So he set the precedent for that, and every year afterward, the next class is the one that chooses it. And you're chosen because of your contributions as a competitor, as a teacher, and also as an ambassador to the martial arts. And that is in quite obvious with your work in the movie and television world and whatnot, and people you've inspired. Have you ever gone back and talked to any of your old students, or do you stay in contact with them?
Yeah, I do stay in contact with all of my black belts. Some of them have gone on to become doctors. One was a captain at the police department I used to work at. And Brian Hawkins puts on this legacy award once a year. And I was fortunate enough to get that award. I think it was 4 years ago. And I invited all of my black belts to come there. And my acceptance speech was to have each one of them stand up because they were my legacy. And I just wanted to show what a legacy was. And I introduced each one of them and told the crowd what they were and what they had become. So yeah, I stay in touch with those guys, and some of my students occasionally will pop up on Facebook or send me an email. So yeah, I still stay in touch with whoever I can.
Let's go to a couple of things. Now, you were in law enforcement. Okay, I'm guessing that was a natural, way of going from the military to say, let's go into law enforcement. Is that how that went about?
Well, yeah, all this stuff is in my book in more detail, but
and they can find that book on your website, right?
Yeah, you can find it on the website or it's on Amazon.
Okay.
It's called A Life at Risk. But I had been trying to be a stuntman for 4 years, traveling down to Los Angeles, training how to do high falls and fights and cars and all of this other stuff. And I was totally unsuccessful after 4 years. So I went out with my partner, a school buddy, and he took me on a ride along. And I was so fascinated by his police work that I signed up to try to do it. Back then, there was a height requirement. You had to be 6 feet, and I'm only 5'7". So they said, thanks for applying, but you're not tall enough. So the day that they dropped that height requirement, which was 4 years after trying to be a stuntman, I had my karate school at the time. I signed up and was accepted. There was 4 of us out of 400 that were accepted. And I went on to be a police officer for 6 years.
What was the most memorable experience working in law enforcement?
Oh man, there's a lot.
Just pick one or two. Something you probably did to help another, because that's what most law enforcement officers do. My brother and my cousin worked for LAPD for 33 years. One was a Sector 3, the other one was a lieutenant. I was going to be a policeman, but they had a hiring freeze on. So instead I went into law school, which was a mistake. So anyway, I mean, there's got to be something that just stands out.
I started out in patrol where I was in a police car, and then I went on to ride motorcycles. And I do remember one night, a rainy night on Cabrillo Boulevard in Santa Barbara. And when that street gets wet, it's reflective and you can't see. And I remember coming to an accident where a woman, an elderly woman, was walking across the street, and her daughter, a grown woman, saw a car coming and tried to grab her, and they were both hit by this car. And I was the first unit there. Back then, we would give first aid if necessary. So I immediately went to the sidewalk, and a nurse had come over that was at the restaurant and put the lady's head in her lap. And I remember grabbing her ankle, which almost fell off in my hand. It was just held on by a shred. And I was wrapping the bandage up to try to save her and stop the bleeding. And the nurse said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. But we know, if you've seen enough death in the street or in life, that many times the heart will increase just before you pass on. The adrenaline is pumping. And unfortunately, she died on the spot. We were able to save her daughter, which was the high point. But that happened many times. I remember going to another accident where I saw a police officer. It was a multi-car accident. And I saw a police officer with a baby in his arms. I was walking past him, and his lips were red. And I was saying, why does he have lipstick on? Is the first thing in my mind. And then I realized his lips were red because the baby was bleeding and he was giving mouth to mouth. These are the kind of, maybe they don't have happy endings, but they're positive images of what policemen do. There's no such image nowadays of these guys and what they give. They give their souls, and they get nothing in return for it. So those are probably my own two stories that I think those guys will get the respect that they deserve one of these days soon.
So let's move on. Now you're going to get into the movie business. You're going to be a big star at the bottom line. Yeah. You hear that? And I know folks, if you watch, just go to Rick's page, and I'll leave that link and share with you at the end. But you look at what he's done, and the cool things is everything you do is the cool movies. You do the cool stuff, sir. And you've worked with a lot of great. My son loves two things. He's a big fan of superheroes like Spider-Man, okay, and he digs the Batman, okay, the Batman. And the Dark Knight has got to be one of the greatest movies that you get to see. And Heath Ledger does an amazing job. Did you actually get to work with him on that set?
With who?
With Heath, the Joker.
Yes. Yeah, we played pool with him on our nights off. Actually, we worked all nights on that show. I've done 4 Batman movies and 3 of them were in Chicago. So, yeah.
Miracle Mile, right
And
down there, Michigan. Yeah.
yeah, Rush Street. Yeah, Miracle Mile right off the, yeah, exactly, in the tunnels.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. And did you do any of the helicopter scenes there?
No, my friend Cliff Fleming and Craig Hosking did the helicopter stuff. But I did fly back commercially to pick the helicopter up and fly it to Chicago. So, and then after the movie, I flew it back.
Do you know James Smith?
Yes, I do know
Yeah, James, a regular friend of mine, Buzz Bundy.
Yeah, Buzz Bundy
was
as
a
well.
great guy. Oh, I mean, there's a protege right there. But
yeah, James Smith is on LA Motorsports commercial team with me. Yeah.
What a great, when next time you see him, tell him I said hi.
I will.
Good person, living up. I believe he's up in, I want to say Washington area with his
Yeah,
wife.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, he's and he always donates his time for anything with the Dukes. Hardcore boy that loves the Dukes Hazzard because he's from Arkansas. And I was there with him in Little Rock and all that. So you're doing these movies, and is there certain movies that just jump out at you that you can say, these were the scenes that I'm so proud of. I did this one and this one, that one and that one, that you can just basically talk about?
Well, the movie that wasn't seen was Blues Brothers 2000, where we did this 54 car pileup. It's on my reel. People could see it. People nowadays think it's CGI, that people couldn't possibly be driving those cars, but we did. We got the Guinness World Book of Records for the biggest car wreck in history for that.
Where did you find all those cars? I'm going to say, because they all have to sort of be similar, right?
We shot that movie up in Toronto, and so we didn't shoot that wreck until the last 2 days of shooting. So I had all these months, and John Landis, who did the first Blues Brothers, would come into my office once a week and say, Rick, people are going to expect a big car wreck like the first movie. What should we do? And I went, I don't know, John. You have this first thing. It's got 5 cars in it. He said, make it 10. Then it would show up the next week and he'd say, add 10 more. Finally, it ended up to be 54 cars. And so I went out and got 54 police cars and civilian cars. We had 8 Bluesmobiles. And for the 54 cars, every single car had a racing seat. Every single car had its own 5-point setup. This is rare. Never been done in movie history.
Yeah.
I brought in guys like Jack Gill, Eddie Braun, people who have UB Kearns, people who have done a lot of this stuff. And then we had a roll cage in every car. And then we went out and tested each of these cars. And I would take soap, a little soap thing, and put on the window what work needed to be done. So all we did on that day was we took these cars and lined them up. And then I had pipe ramps and jump ramps. We would have 5 cars doing jumps at the same time at 55 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour. And the guys would just get out of that car and then run back or limp back, get in the next car and do it again. And we were paying really good money for the rollovers. And the guys told me before we started, just keep putting me, if I can't walk, just put me in the car. I just got to drive and do it. But we found the limitation was 3. You couldn't do more than 3. Most guys did 2. I did 2. And I remember coming back in the US and this from Canada, and the Border Patrol guy said to me, so what were you doing in Canada? And I said, well, we were doing a movie, doing a bunch of car wrecks. Well, what did you do? I'm a stunt man. Well, you don't look like you did a bunch of car wrecks. And so I lifted my sunglasses and my eyes were red like a vampire because all the capillaries in my eyes had busted. So yeah, I guess those would probably be the most memorable stunt I did. That and the Ferrari thing I did, doubling Dr. Dre on I Need a Doctor video.
That is very cool. And for you, those that you got to get a chance, watch Rick's reel. I mean, wow. You can see a lot. You did also firework. You did fire. You did falls.
I had a mentor. His name was Alan Gibbs. He's no longer with us. Who taught me all of the various modes of stunt work. Today we have young people that are coming into the business with one one athletic ability. Maybe they could do wire work or they can just do gymnastics, but they can't drive a car. They can't ride a motorcycle. Alan taught us how to do horse work, how to do motorcycles, how to fall off a building, how to do a stair fall, how to do fire, how to do the basic car principle works. And so it was better to go on a movie on location, and we traveled a lot back then, and be on a location for 3 months where he could say, okay, put on a hat, ride that motorcycle. Okay, put on this mustache and then go fall off the building. So he wanted people who could do it all. And you didn't have to be an A quality person at doing it all, but you had to be able to do it all. So I had that opportunity to be able to do it all.
You know, there are other things in this. Let's go back to your martial arts abilities. Okay, so let's start dabbling into that, because you obviously morphed in and expanded your toolbox to encompass all these things: firework, falls, motorcycles, horse. Like George P. Wilbur or Jim Winburn, or
Yep.
yeah, they
those
know
guys
you.
are in the Stuntman Association. So yeah.
So let's go into your movies with martial arts, okay? Because that's one of the reasons you're being recognized, and that's probably dear to your heart. Give us some of the top ones that you like, that you really enjoyed. Now, they couldn't have been maybe always a martial arts movie, but there could have been some martial arts choreography that you would do stunt-wise in them. Pick a few.
Well, when I started coordinating movies, I was being called for martial arts because that was my go-to thing. And I didn't like it at first because I wanted to do car work. I wanted to do these big car gags. And then I realized, well, get the show, if it has a car gag in it, then you can do it. So I wised up. I did most of Jeff Speakman's movies. I was his stunt coordinator and fight choreographer. And then I directed 2 of his movies as well. Worked with Chuck Norris on Walker, and did a movie called Fire Walker with Chuck. Know his whole family very, very well. Worked with Brandon Lee on all of his movies. So yeah, I've had some great times, and then of course worked with other people on movies, where I had to use martial arts as well.
I'll go in this way. It's sort of hard because you're dealing with somebody that maybe is a martial artist, and it's a martial arts movie. Okay, so you're looking at Speakman and Norris, and then obviously Lee. When you're working with them, I guess that's a fine line. How do you help them, or do you help them set up the actual sequence, or you just say, okay, you tell me what you want to do and we'll do it?
Well, Jeff Amata was the stunt coordinator on all Brandon stuff. So Jeff, a very good friend of mine who I respect immensely. I was just told I was brought in as one of the guys to beat up or to double. I was also brought in after Brandon was killed. I was flown in to do the reshoots and the ending of the story, to double one of the actors there. With Chuck, they would fly me out to Dallas, Texas, to specifically do fights with Chuck, because he preferred people he trusted and knew. And that was always a joy. And that, again, would be, what do you want me to do, Chuck? With Jeff, the only thing Jeff insisted on was he wanted the techniques that were done in the movie to be pure Kenpo techniques, nothing else. And so that was easy for me. He would say the name of the technique or the combination that he wanted to do, and we would do it. And then he was very open to me then adding that stunt flavor to it. Most of the stunt guys, we're used to taking a punch that is a big miss, you know what I mean? And we sell it to look like a hit. Jeff made the hits on my stunt guys, so I had to pay him an extra amount of money because they were always getting physically abused by him. But yeah, it would just depend on the martial artist that you were working with, you see.
When you were with, I'm guessing, was that with Mr. Parker, The Perfect Weapon? Did you work that movie?
Yeah,
okay.
That was
How
the
much
first
influence
movie
did Parker have on that? Because you're obviously working as a Parker student.
Well, Mr. Parker's influence was getting Jeff the part. Mr. Parker is funny. I got a call from him, and he said, I was working on some movie, I don't know, somewhere down in LA, and he asked me if I was in LA, and I said, yeah. And he said, can I send one of my students over there? He's an aspiring actor to meet you. And Jeff at the time was a blue belt and came over and very respectfully, yes, sir, this, yes, sir, that. I'm gonna do this movie. And he signed for a 3-picture deal with Paramount with Sherry Lansing, who was the boss at the time. She eventually left Paramount, so he didn't get his second 2 pictures from them. But The Perfect Weapon was the first picture, and Mr. Parker would come down to the set and and see what was going on. So yeah, he was influential in getting Jeff into the movies for sure.
Was there any scene that you were working with that really stands out, that you initially started one way, then we're gonna have to go this way with it, or we're gonna shoot this and then we're gonna cut to this and we're gonna insert this? Because sometimes that's how movies are, or they'll repeat the same movement over and over because it looks good. Like when they blow up a building, you always see at least 3 times the building going boom, boom, and boom.
Yeah, I don't recall that happening. I think everything, because we did so many movies together, we didn't want to repeat. Now he has an ending stuff where he's doing this one combination that he ends up with, and he would use that as his popular move to use in every movie. But yeah, Kenpo has so many moves, it's really easy to come up with something different. And the thing that's most important, that as a stunt coordinator performing a fight, is the environment. If you walk into an empty gym and try to do a fight in there, it's really hard to do. You need to have a theme, whether it's glass or tables or whatever the theme happens to be, to utilize in the movie. I worked with Jackie Chan on 2 movies and did a fight with him on a couple, and all of his movies are themed. So that's always been a principle of mine. I know Simon Rhee, a good friend of mine, and James Liu, another good friend of mine. That's something that we always look for.
Okay. Very cool. Do you ever go to Dragon's Fest?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I go to there always, and excited. This year it's going to be in Glendale, so that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Michael, and you will see Michael, who'll be in Las Vegas this year. Now, we've talked about working with Speakman, and you've worked with Norris, and obviously Lee. Did you ever work with or do anything with Bob Wall, or spending time with Bob Wall?
I spent time with Bob Wall. That's a talker.
Yeah, he sure is.
Between you and him, I don't know who gets the last word in, but no, Bob. I've been spent some time with Bob. God rest his soul. And yeah, flamboyant man. I like him. He
was going to be at this year's event, and we were going to have him there to talk about these things, because he has stories and stories and stories, and whatever. I mean, there's stories. I don't know who wore who out more. My son, 6.5-year-old, or Bob wore him out, because I was worn out after 4 hours at Bob's house doing that stuff. So, okay, so you're working with Norris. Does Norris? How does it feel like? It must be pretty exciting that you're working with Chuck Norris, and he's always famous for fighting Bruce Lee and losing. Does that ever come up in your discussion? No,
no, we never talked about Bruce. And when I worked with Chuck, back in the Walker days, he was busy. He was the producer. His son would direct. Aaron Norris was a producer as well. So no, we didn't spend a lot of time talking. We do it mostly working. But I do remember when we did Firewalker down in Mexico, I do remember in my mind, Aaron Norris was in one car, Chuck Norris was in another car with all of the stunt guys, all of us. We were taking a taxi to dinner, and we decided we were going to bet and race these taxis to dinner through Mexico City. And we did this race, and all I remember was looking over at Chuck's car, and he was losing. And I was in Aaron's car, and we were winning. All I could see was pesos being thrown at the drivers to go faster, faster, faster. I don't know why we weren't stopped, but we had some great times on that movie. But no, we never talked about Bruce or anything like that.
Let's go. You mentioned working the last movie with that Brendan was on, The Crow. Okay, yeah. The Crow. You get called in. What was the scene that you actually had to work on?
There was a scene, I can't remember the name of the actor that I was doubling. It was a car chase scene where he goes off the end of a pier.
That's right. The guy was in the Warriors, and I can't remember his name for right now.
Yeah, exactly. And it was really, really strange because when I came back, I was the new guy to come back and do these pickup shots. And I remember his stuntman being in the back seat dressed in the crow uh, makeup, and he looked exactly like him. It was so eerie, and the crew was so downtrodden from what had happened that Bobby Bass was the stunt coordinator, and yeah, it was a dreamlike atmosphere.
Surreal.
Yeah,
Surreal.
surreal would be another good word.
Yeah, I think the guy that you're talking about was David Patrick T-Bird. David Patrick was the one that he's the one that drove the car.
Yes.
The and he was doing
and Jeff Cadiente became the crow for that pickup shot.
and correct me if I'm wrong. The one that doubled for Mr. Lee, he later on went on to great success with the John Wick movies. Is it true?
No, that was Jeff Cadiente. He mostly does television shows and things like that. He's back in Hawaii, I believe. He was doing Magnum PI for a while, those types of shows, did VIP for a while.
Oh, you know Bob Brovler?
Yeah, I know Bob Brovler, sure.
Yeah, great guy over there. He comes always out to Las Vegas for my events and brings money to give to the Children's Miracle Network. And
I worked for Bob when he started as a stunt coordinator on Knight Rider, and then Jack Gill took over and I started working for Jack. So yeah, I worked for both those guys on those shows.
So in the previous two guys, you talk about Jeff. Jeff wanted to be a purist working with Kenpo. Chuck is just being Chuck, doing what he does well. But the problem, well, you didn't get a chance. I would have asked it with Lee how did he feel about being always compared to his father, sort of like maybe Lisa Marie Presley.
I didn't see that. Now, Jeff Amata might know an answer about that because he was very, very close with Brandon. Brandon on the set was just an extremely likable, non-egotistical type of guy. I would guess that it didn't affect him because he was so upscale about everyone around him and had his own confidence and his own ability, and treated all of the stunt people with great respect. It was just he was just wonderful. He would have had a fantastic career.
Oh, there's no doubt. So that man had charisma.
And I think his mom had a lot of influence about that as well. Tom Bleecker, who was the co-author in my book, who's in our style, he knew the Lees very well. So he probably could answer that better than me.
We're going on to this now. Obviously, the one thing that always scares everybody is that you guys paid to run into buildings on fire, or you get paid to fall off a building about 3 stories, 10 stories, whatever it is, and not get hurt. We're not supposed to do that. That's not human nature. Okay, but sometimes we have mishaps. How do you deal with that to prevent that on the set?
A lot of preparation, and depending on the size of the stunt that you're going to do, the more prep and rehearsal time that you need. Back in the days, and I'm talking about the late 70s and throughout the 80s, we didn't have a lot of prep time. There was a lot of television going on in here in Hollywood, and we would show up and do a show like Fall Guy and do 2 jumps and a car rollover in a day. We didn't have time to rehearse. We just brought in the talent. When I did the first Batman movie, or the second Batman, which would Batman Begins, the coordinator called us over and gave us 5 weeks of rehearsal time. And I said, you're giving us 5 weeks of rehearsal that we would just show up and do on the day. So things have changed over the decades on how we prepare to do a stunt. The bigger it is, the more prep, the more talent you got to bring in, and the more rehearsal time. And then if you get banged up, that's part of the deal. We're part of the Screen Actors Guild, so we come in under the same contract, even a little bit more. And then depending on the stunt, you're given an adjustment or a bump, as they call it. So we'll come in on our daily or our weekly pay. And then if you do a stair fall, you might get an extra $1,000 for that. If you do it 2 or 3 times, you get incrementally more money. So the more, and then of course, the beauty of our profession is we get residuals for the rest of our life. So every time that's shown, we get a little check.
Well, you've actually had to wear the seat or the hat of a director, a coordinator, an actor, a stuntman. What's the most exciting of those that you get to do?
Stuntman for sure. Director is just, it's a high pressure job with a lot of stress attached to it because you're the leader, and every single decision from the color of the carpet to the room you're shooting in comes down to you, and nothing gets done until you show up on the set. Stunt coordinator, there's also the stress of the responsibility of having your performers perform, bringing in the right talent, making the scene live up to what the director's vision is. But the fun part is being the stunt guy. So that's the most kick-ass time there is.
You work with these actors and there's probably great reverence for you. Like, wow, this guy's going to make me look, I got this guy. He's going to make me look good. And I know that. Look at your smile because you know that to be true, because that's the magic of movie making. They bring in the right person. Is there any of the actors that you've worked with that just stand out? Said maybe two or three that just like, well, I love working with this guy, this gal. Or
extremely fortunate. The man who got me into the business was John Travolta, and back then he was a lot thinner, so I was a really good head-on double, shorter but a head-on double. So I doubled John for 10 years, and we had a great relationship. I've doubled guys like Henry Winkler, who is a joy on the set, just a blast. So I've done a lot of his things. And the last 10 years, I've been Bob De Niro's stuntman. So you say, well, what does Bob do? Well, a lot of comedies and a lot of me getting my ass kicked. So I would say that those are the influential guys that I've worked with, that I've really enjoyed working with. And you get a familial feeling when you work with these gentlemen. If you do more than one or two shows and they put you in their contract and now you're part of their family, the trust has been put in you, and it's nice to show up on the set and say, good morning, Bob, and you get a hug, and you see that you've been appreciated for what you've done that day.
Do you have any differences with your actors about, I really don't think we should do this or we shouldn't do that, or is that decision is basically directorial?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've had not very often where I've had differences with actors. Usually they'll go along with what the stunt coordinator says. He's kind of, the stunt coordinator, when we're doing action, he's the king of the set, and what he says goes. You'll have some directors that like to push it, like Michael Bay, who I have nothing good to say about. They don't care, but in the end, the stunt coordinator is the boss, and even more so in the old days when they were feared as well.
Yes, no doubt. Look, we're going to get to the end now because we've had so much. You're fun. You're fun to talk to. And I'm going to ask you like just three things left. Okay.
Okay.
You've had a long, lengthy career, and it's continuing. This is not an end, but what would you like to think the most memorable thing you'd be remembered for?
I don't know that there's one thing that I would be remembered for. I would hope that when I mentioned the legacy before, the people that I've had some influence on, because of my varied career, whether it's flying, there's a lot of, I've had 50 students that I've taught to fly helicopters, and I've had a lot of influence on them, just as the instructors have had an influence on me. Occasionally a student will contact me through Facebook and tell me something I had said when I was teaching him a martial arts has changed his life. Just as things like Joe Louis has changed my life, or Mr. Parker, a simple thing they said one day that changed everything for me. So I would hope that that would be an answer for your question.
Sure, I get that. What about the biggest influence or impact on your life?
Well, I wish you'd given me time to prepare for that.
Listen, we don't get 5 weeks here. What's wrong with you?
The most influential thing in my life was a man named Alan Gibbs. He was the man who brought me into stunt work and taught me everything that I know about it. And I remember we were flying back to New York. We would always fly first class. And we were talking about high falls, and I have a fear of heights. You wouldn't think that because I fly helicopters and, I've done these high falls. I hated every minute being above 15 feet. It scares the hell out of me. It scares me even more to watch people that are standing there next to me. And I would say to Alan, and Alan said, I could teach an old lady to do a 50-foot high fall, Rick. And I went, yeah, Alan, I go with the Clint Eastwood slogan that says a man needs to know his limitations. And he said, no, Rick, a man needs to stretch his limitations. So that was what I did the rest of my life. I stretched my limitations.
Wow. You're amazing, Rick. You're really amazing. So many things there. I'm really excited to be say to everyone here. This is one of our newest Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame inductees, Rick Avery. Continued success. We look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas, and you're the best. So
thanks, pal. Yeah, see ya.
All right, take care.